there was some good. Unfortunately for Oklahoma, there was some bad, some unexpected bad. But first of all, let's talk about the good from Lawrence, Kansas on October 15th. Oklahoma beats Kansas, but then again, prior to kickoff, my son could have told you that Oklahoma was going to beat Kansas, and he's only 6 years old. Sooners win the game 47-17 over KU. And some other good news for the Sooners. Ryan Broyles, an historic night for the senior from Norman. Broyles now stands alone when it comes to receptions. No player in the history of college football has caught more passes in his career than Ryan Broyles. And Broyles, 13 catches, over 200 yards on the night. And by the way, still 6 games to go in the regular season. So Broyles, the record holder for most catches in a career, will have an opportunity to really pad that record. It's been a joy watching him play since he first started playing for OU back in 2008. So now that we've mentioned a good part of the good, before I get into the bad, and there was plenty of bad for Oklahoma on Saturday night despite the victory, I have to give props to Kansas, because I really butchered them on my weekly matchup show just a few days ago. Not really because of the fact that they're not a good team, but from lack of effort. From all accounts against Oklahoma State last week, it looked like that team just gave up and gave up early. In fact, down 56-7 at halftime to the Pokes. So I wondered and I doubted if Kansas was going to play hard for the rest of the season, especially against the #1 ranked team in the country, the Sooners, on Saturday night. Well, we got the answer to that question right away, because at the end of the first quarter, it was 10-7. At one point in that first half, it was 10-10. And keep in mind that Kansas has the worst defense in the country in all of college football. And keep in mind that the week before, they gave up 70 points to Oklahoma State. And keep in mind, Kansas came into this game on a 3-game losing skid. So there was absolutely no reason to think prior to this game that Kansas was going to be able to even stand a chance for a half against the Sooners. Now, why did this happen the way it did? Part of it was because of Kansas's effort. They played better than we thought, but a really big part of it, not to take anything away from KU, but a big part of it was the fact that Oklahoma played like crap. It's that simple to say. They played like crap. Defensively, could not defend the run. They gave up over 160 yards on the ground in the first half. Darian Miller and James Sims from Kansas looked like Jim Brown and Walter Payton against the Sooner defense. And I give the Sooners credit in that second half for finally stepping up to the plate, but that first half, on the 4th-and-1 play in the first quarter, where the Sooners gambled and then came up empty on the big run by Sims that made it 10-7. At that point, you're thinking, could it be one of those games? Not one of those games where Oklahoma is going to get beat, but one of those games where the Sooners struggle throughout. Defensively, in that first half, it was bad for the Sooners as far as run defense. It was horrible. Pass defense, thought they played good. And again, in the second half, Sooners made adjustments, and Kansas only had 1 first down that entire second half. In fact, I think they only had about 30 yards, if that much, of total offense in the second half. Finally got to Jordan Webb, and 5 sacks on the night for the Sooner defense. Offensively was my biggest concern of the night for the Sooners. Not because of moving the ball, because they were able to move the ball. From quarter 1 to quarter 4, they were able to move it up and down the field. I think they ended up having over 600 yards of total offense in the game. But the problem was not getting touchdowns. 7 trips to the red zone for Oklahoma inside Kansas's 20. Happened to settle for field goals 4 times. 4 times. 3 of those times, Oklahoma got inside the KU 10 and still couldn't score a touchdown. But the only good thing you can say about those red zone trips is that Michael Honeycutt got a lot of field goal practice. Made all his field goals. But the point I'm trying to make is Oklahoma gets inside a future opponent's 20-yard line 4 times and comes away with field goals every time. If it's against Kansas State, pretty good chance Oklahoma's going to get beat. They do that against Baylor, pretty good chance Oklahoma's going to make that game in Waco a lot more interesting than it should. They do that against Oklahoma State, Oklahoma could get trounced. Because Oklahoma State, you get a feeling, is not going to blow their red zone chances. So what needs to be done for OU as far as the red zone? And really right now, I don't know. Maybe give it to Trey Millard. I don't know what the deal is. But the Sooners have some things to work on when it comes to the red zone. And look, I knew that the Sooners were not going to come into this game maybe having the same level of motivation that they did for Texas. After all, Texas is typically one of the 2-3 biggest games of the year, and sometimes it's the biggest. Coming off an emotional victory against the Longhorns, a game that you just executed on both sides of the ball crisply against the Longhorns, and then the next week playing against one of the worst teams around in Kansas, I can understand where your emotional level is not going to be the same. But the Sooners just acted like, with no disrespect to Kansas, like they didn't care. And kind of just going through the motions, and that's exactly how it looked in that first half in particular. And then the turnovers. Whaley fumbled for the first time. Ryan Broyles, for the great game he had, he knows he made an error on that fumble because if you saw the play, you saw where he misjudged the goal line. He was trying to stretch the ball out to score, and he was a good 2 yards short of the goal line, so that was a misjudgment on his part. Initially, the play was called down at the 2, but the replay overturned it, and at the time, you know, it kept Kansas in the game because it was a two-score game at that point, with Oklahoma having a chance to really open it up. So there were some mistakes made, and Landry Jones, I thought, played okay, but it wasn't one of his best games. In the beginning, he was bad. In the beginning, had more incompletions than completions. And this is a guy that knows where to throw the ball. He's typically accurate, but in the early going, he was anything but. Thankfully, he got it going later on in the game. Had over 300 yards passing, but it was not one of his best games. So for the Sooners, you're glad that they won. And again, if you look at this ball game in the sports section of the newspaper, and you didn't watch any of it, you're going to think 47-17, hey, why are you so upset? OU Sooner 56. They won and won comfortably. If you watch the game, though, you know it wasn't that easy. And a good part of it was because the Sooners had a lack of execution, especially in the red zone. Those are things that have to be corrected, especially with the second half of the schedule coming up for the Sooners, in which Texas Tech, you know, it's not going to be one of those name-your-score type games. And in 2 weeks, you know, you're playing in Manhattan, Kansas against the Kansas State team that should be undefeated entering that game. K-State plays Kansas next week. So you would think the Wildcats would take care of the Jayhawks, and it should be 7-0 against 7-0, and ESPN's College Game Day could possibly be in Manhattan for that game. And another thing, too, before I talk about the one key to the game that we did highlight earlier this week on the Weekly Matchup Show, I like what I saw from Roy Finch. He got some playing time and did some good things, got hurt in the game, but prior to that was doing some real good things, so I'm going to be curious to see if his playing time does increase. Whaley had a terrific game tonight, some tough running, over 160 yards rushing, but I think Finch still is your breakaway back, as we saw in this particular game on Saturday night. So Sooners offensively move the ball up and down the field, but have to do a better job at executing, and defensively a bad first half for the Sooners, much better job though in the second half. One key to this game, we only had one key for this week, and that was OU don't let up, talking about coming into this game well prepared and focused, a D- for the Sooners. Can't give them an F because they did win the ball game, and there were some good things that did come out of it. For example, the play of Ryan Broyles, for example. But no question, the Sooners did not bring their top game with them. In an effort like that in future games, and OU's chances of a national championship appearance are flushed down the toilet. So up next for the Sooners, another primetime game. It'll be October 22nd when the Sooners are back at home as they will take on Texas Tech. And don't forget about the Kansas State game, which at the beginning of the year probably wouldn't have thought it would have had much relevance as far as the national picture. Now it takes on heavy relevance as the Sooners will play at K-State in 2 weeks on October the 29th. Like I said, it's going to start getting tougher for the Sooners, and hopefully OU learned from this experience in Lawrence. Victories are always nice, but it's the way you play that's going to determine just how far you can go. And thank goodness that the Sooners were not playing Kansas State or Oklahoma State on this particular night, because it could have been a much different result. Sooners again beat Kansas 47-17. Boomer Sooner.